We're starting with WWE, who recently released Jinder Mahal, Zion Quinn, Veer Mahan, Sangha, Xia Li, and Von Wagner, and now there's another name for that list. On Twitter, Cameron Grimes shared an emotional video revealing that he'd just got off the phone with WWE and his 5-year tenure has come to an end. On the verge of tears, Grimes recalled that the last thing he was able to tell his father was that he'd signed with WWE, and he thanked everyone who supported him during his run. Grimes added that his release has lit a fire under him and that he intends to continue on as Trevor Lee and is ready to show WWE what they missed out on. Grimes had a solid run in NXT, but his main roster call-up fell flat, and what do you make of news of his release? Let us know down in the comments. As we mentioned, Von Wagner was among those released by WWE, despite once being poised for a huge push, and the company had a bizarre reason for cutting the second-generation star. On Wrestling Observer Radio, Dave Meltzer explained that despite what fans were seeing on TV, Wagner was considered a main roster talent when it came to these releases. He added, "He is technically, like Zion Quinn, they are main roster wrestlers. They were considered main roster wrestlers, therefore, because they were not being used on the main roster, the decision was made to dump them." WWE barely used Wagner or Quinn on the main roster, and then determined they weren't doing enough on the main roster to warrant their contracts in what was a self-fulfilling prophecy. If WWE felt Wagner and Quinn weren't doing enough on the main roster, perhaps they should have used them more, and what do you make of WWE's reasoning when cutting the two stars? As main roster talent, Wagner and Quinn will have to wait 90 days before they can compete elsewhere, but this non-compete clause may soon be a thing of the past. This week, the Federal Trade Commission voted 3-2 to implement a ban on non-compete agreements for all workers, with the new regulations set to take effect in 120 days. Not only will this prevent future non-compete agreements, but it will also eliminate existing deals, though the new rule is expected to face legal challenges from companies. Non-competes are often used by companies to prevent employees from joining competitors, and it's unclear how this ban will directly affect the world of pro wrestling. After all, wrestlers are classed as independent contractors rather than traditional employees, and WWE has a 90-day clause for main roster stars and a 30-day clause for NXT talent. During these time periods, released talent are still paid and given the independent contractor classification. It's uncertain if the FTC's new regulations will apply directly to pro wrestlers. Given that this ban will take 120 days to come into effect, it's not expected to affect those recently released, as even if the rule affects WWE, these clauses will have already ended. The FTC's move comes after the WWE-UFC merger to form TKO Group, a move that required FTC approval, and it's estimated that 18% of working Americans face a non-compete agreement. That equates to around 30 million people, and we'll have to see how pro wrestling and other independent contracts will be impacted by this landmark change to business. Over to NXT now, as the stakes were high in the main event of Spring Breakin, as Trick Williams put his NXT career on the line in his title match with champion Ilja Dragunov. Even before the entrances, there was some extra excitement to the showdown, with World Heavyweight Champion Damian Priest wishing Dragunov luck in the bout. The match was made official following Trick Williams' monumental win over Carmelo Hayes at NXT Stand and Deliver, with Williams agreeing to leave NXT if he came up short. Trick gained momentum last week with a steel cage win over Hayes, and in a backstage segment of his own, had some words of motivation from his mom and from NXT veteran Johnny Gargano. With all on the line, neither man held anything back as jam-packed action had the NXT fans on their feet, while Gargano, Ivy Nile, The Creeds, and New Catch Republic watched on. The match rightly deserved its "This is awesome" chant as the action spilled out of the ring, and as we've seen before, Trick and Dragunov clicked on every level. This match was somewhat rushed compared to their Vengeance Day encounter, leaving little time to sell, but the two did what they needed as a passing of the torch moment. NXT did everything to sell this as one of the most important matches in the brand's history, and in the end, it was Williams who had his moment and proved he's ready to run. This victory marks the end of Trick's initial journey, but now he'll have to prove he can sustain his success without one of the best wrestlers in the world today. As for Dragunov, he's expected to head to the main roster in the draft, and he has a ceiling as high as rival Gunther, who may soon be a world champion and sharing the ring with his old foe. Jada Parker scored a win over Fallon Henley on the show, but she suffered a cosmetic malfunction as her hair extensions came off during the decisive pinfall. Undeterred, Parker took the hair and threw it aside and was pleased to get the win at Spring Breakin. It was back in 2021 that Paige Vanzant debuted for AEW, and not long after, it was confirmed that she'd signed with the promotion. After making her in-ring debut at Double or Nothing 2022, though, fans haven't seen the former UFC fighters, and audiences tuning in to AEW shouldn't expect to see her again. On Wrestling Observer Radio, Dave Meltzer responded to a fan's question by stating that Vanzant has left AEW despite no official announcement and her still being listed on the roster. Meltzer added that Paige simply recognized that professional wrestling was not for her and said that if she wanted to be a wrestler, she'd still be there. The former UFC fighter last competed in MMA in July 2020 and boasts an 8-5 record, and whatever the future holds for her, it won't involve professional wrestling. When Sheamus made his WWE TV return after months away, some fans noticed that he'd gained some weight, though that didn't stop him from delivering in his matches. On this week's Raw, Drew McIntyre referenced this, saying that instead of having banger after banger matches, his friend and occasional rival had been having burger after burger instead. The line actually got a laugh from Sheamus in the moment, and according to Sean Ross Sapp, the Celtic Warrior was said to be okay with the burgers line. In fact, Sheamus is leaning into the joke, as he tweeted that when he wins King of the Ring for the second time in his career, he wants to be called the Burger King instead. Sheamus may have gained some weight, but he's still in whopper shape. And what do you make to these references to his weight? Give your thoughts in the comments. During this week's Raw, Ludwig Kaiser turned on Giovanni Vinci after the pair's loss to the New Day, and backstage, Gunther seemed proud of the German for his actions. While Kaiser is done with Vinci, he's not done with Imperium, as Fightful Select reports that he and Gunther are tentatively scheduled to work together after turning on Vinci. Of course, plans could change, though that's been far less common with Vince McMahon out of the picture, so expect to see more of Imperium on TV, but without Giovanni Vinci with them. It was back in January that Dwayne Johnson was appointed to TKO's board of directors in a blockbuster move for The Rock, and now more has come to light about this situation. As Brandon Thurston reports, the contract allows Johnson to engage with third-party services for the development of scripts and storylines to be used in WWE. Not only that, but WWE has agreed to reimburse Johnson's $7 Productions company for any associated costs they incur to promote his WWE projects. Johnson is entitled to receive $30 million in TKO equity distributed over time, though much of his deal, including if it's guaranteed in the case of termination, is being kept confidential. A huge takeaway from his contract is that WWE is restricted on how they can use The Rock's name and likeness, and Johnson has to give consent for his name to be used on certain products. This deal is very favorable to The Rock, so it's hardly a surprise that he signed it, as the final boss will continue to have a huge say over WWE both on and off screen. When Jinder Mahal was thrust into a World Heavyweight title program, the decision incurred the wrath of Tony Khan, leading to several social media outbursts by the AEW president. On the Insight podcast, Mahal was asked about his feud with Khan and how it was something of a blessing for him thanks to the intrigue it built in his match. He said, "Drew had texted me. I got a bunch of texts in a row. I was like, what? I've got to see this. And then I opened up Twitter and that's what I saw. Thank you, Tony. You made that match with Seth more interesting. People actually thought I was going to win it just to spite Tony. I was surprised. Everybody stuck up for me. That's never happened before." Many came to Mahal's defense as the situation was seen as being a wrestling boss taking shot at a wrestler who's lower down on the proverbial totem pole of the business. After his release from WWE, it's been reported that there's a joke among superstars that Mahal will be feuding with Khan on AEW Dynamite this summer, though that seems unlikely. Where Mahal actually does go next, that remains to be seen, but what did you make to his feud with the AEW president earlier this year? Let us know down below. We've got some concerning news regarding former WWE superstar Lars Sullivan, who is being accused of some seriously inappropriate behavior. On Twitter, a spa employee called Marissa shared that Sullivan, described as some right-wing nut white supremacist, called her spa and left a profanity-filled, threatening voicemail. Since Sullivan didn't block his number, Marissa called back and laughed at Sullivan, who she later learned is a washed-up pro wrestler, and questioned how many women he's done this to. Marissa declared Sullivan to be a joke and clearly unhinged, and said that he hated that she laughed at his threatening voicemail when she called him back. Sullivan has kept a low profile since leaving WWE, which came after a series of controversies to his name, and we'll have to see if he gives any explanation of what happened with this call. More from NXT Spring Breakin as Drew Gulak continued to be absent due to the allegations made by Ronda Rousey, and there was an indirect mention of him this week. On commentary, Vic Joseph remarked how the family had resolved the problem of the no-quarter catch crew, alluding that Gulak was now taken care of. This is the explanation that was given on last week's NXT, and while Gulak's future in WWE hangs in the balance, don't expect him on NXT TV. The Final Testament recently made their way to NXT, and on this week's show, a video aired with an ominous message from the Karrion Kross-led faction. Paul Ellering said that the Final Testament is coming for all the titles, and we'll have to see if that indeed happens in the future. In Janelle Grant's lawsuit, the ex-WWE employee claims she was sexually abused and trafficked by Vince McMahon, with John Laurinaitis being one of the men she was trafficked to. Now McMahon has filed a motion to move the case to arbitration, as he'd rather see the matter resolved discreetly rather than in a public court setting. In his filing, McMahon stands by his claim that Grant's claims are pure fiction designed to attract publicity, and that her statements at the time of the relationship contradict her claims. McMahon maintains that he and Grant were involved in a consensual relationship, and that he never coerced or mistreated her in any way, and he doesn't stop there. McMahon also refutes the claim that Grant was in a vulnerable position during their relationship due to the death of her parents, as he argues that she wouldn't still be grieving the loss. Grant's parents died a few years before the alleged relationship, and McMahon evidently believes that she couldn't have still been grieving, and thus wasn't a vulnerable person. In a statement to Post Wrestling and WrestleNomics, Grant's attorney Ann Callis said that it was an all-new level of disgusting for McMahon to use Grant's grief in this way. Callis added that Grant's father was in-home hospice during his final days, but Janelle still cared for him around the clock, and she'd also been caring for her blind, wheelchair-bound mother. Callis went on to say that McMahon has never known a storyline that he doesn't fit to twist his own shameful narrative, which she believes is still happening with this case. So what's next? Well, all parties involved in the suit will have submitted their responses to the case by June 1st, with Laurinaitis and McMahon's deadlines being on May 14th and May 24th. The June 1st deadline is when WWE itself will have to give their response to the court, and will continue to follow this case for updates. In late 2023, Kenny Omega revealed that he was battling diverticulitis, which has kept the former AEW World Champion out of the ring ever since. Omega isn't expected to compete anytime soon, as it's believed he'll be having surgery in the near future, but fans should be able to see him on AEW TV within a matter of days. On Twitter, the Canada Life Center in Winnipeg revealed that Omega will be at the May 1st episode of Dynamite that'll take place in his hometown. It's odd that AEW themselves haven't revealed this, and it may be a case of the arena accidentally spoiling a surprise, but fans will get to see Kenny Omega very soon. A competitive triple threat for the NXT Women's title saw Tatum Paxley catch Lyra Valkyria with a 450 splash, only for Roxanne Perez to fly in with a crucifix pin to win. This was a great match to open the show that showcased all three women, and was a step up for Paxley, who looked like she belonged. In fact, the crowd seemed invested in the idea of an upset win, and the prospect that Paxley was far closer to being the next NXT Women's Champion than anybody expected. If Perez sticks around post-draft, a feud with Paxley is a must, and will give Tatum a chance to show what she can do one-on-one with top talent. Natalya and Lola Vice signed the contract for next week's NXT Underground match, and Vice revealed Shayna Baszler as her training partner before Baszler KO'd Carmen Petrovic. Natalya would bring the fight right back, sending Vice into the crowd at ringside, though this segment fell flat, and it didn't need to happen in the ring for a match with limited build. Still, it's good to see Baszler back in NXT, as she has a different vibe in the Gold brand and comes across as untouchable despite selling a Petrovic kick like a knockout blow. Ava sold this as a monumental moment for women's wrestling, but NXT Underground hardly has the legacy to match up to that promise, as it's only the third of its type in WWE NXT. The No Quarter Catch crew looked great together as they faced the family, but in the end it was Tony D'Angelo who planted Dempsey with a spinebuster for the clean win. This match worked like the careers of the six men depended on it and highlighted the chemistry of Dempsey, Damon Kemp, and Miles Bourne. This was the best the heels have looked, but the family still came out on top, and D'Angelo still looks like someone who could contend for the NXT title. Stax Lorenzo and Luca Crucifino continued to impress, and don't be surprised if the Don goes for the NXT Heritage Cup after this big win. During a recent WWE NXT, Tatum Paxley spoke of some of the all-time great NXT Women's Champions, but fans couldn't help notice that Mandy Rose's name wasn't included. During the Power Alphas podcast, Rose, who held the title for 413 days, expressed her disappointment with WWE for excluding her despite her achievements in the Gold brand. On the show, Rose acknowledged why WWE may not want to mention her, but found it hypocritical that they still sold her merch after her controversial release. She said, "I also just think it's kind of funny and hypocritical where, you can't get recognized on TV. Let's say, including my name in that long list of superstars, but yet you can still sell my merch and action figures for the rest of my life. That part really gets me a little bit in a sense. You're gonna be able to sell my stuff for the rest of my life, but yet you can't even showcase, or say my name?" Mandy Rose has hinted at a possible return to wrestling, indicating she isn't closing the door on the industry, but she's clearly disappointed that WWE won't properly acknowledge her. Rose was one of the longest reigning champions in NXT, not that you'd know it from the current product, as WWE is eager to put her career and legacy in the past. Recently, Pete Dunne and Shawn Spears began doing some work as producers despite being on-screen talent, and now another on-screen name is working backstage. Fightful Select reports that Robert Stone is set to do some producer work in NXT, and with the release of Von Wagner, this could be quite the new role for the on-screen manager. Back to NXT as Lexis King brought the fight to Baron Corbin before hitting a low blow behind the ref's back, and a coronation scored the win for the ex-AEW star. This was more solid than outstanding, but it was by far the best match of King's NXT career to date, though that's hardly a surprise with the ever-reliable Corbin. Sol Ruca got her revenge on Blair Davenport with their beach brawl, and it was a beautiful soul snatcher onto a board that got the win for the promising star. And that was this week's WWE NXT. And what did you make of this week's Spring Breakin' show? Let us know down in the comments. And we're ending today with RVD, who joined WWE after the collapse of the original ECW and quickly became one of the company's most popular stars and was coronated WWE champion in 2006. Van Damme's days of being a full-time superstar, however, are a distant memory, and while he's not wrestled for WWE since August 2014, a return remains a possibility. On his one-of-a-kind podcast, RVD admitted he was hesitant to reach out to WWE in fear of rejection, but if they contacted him, he'd hear their proposal out. He said, "I'd be totally open to it. I don't know what it would take for that to happen. It's possible that it would take me picking up the phone and telling them that I want to do this in order to start the fire. If that's what it would take, chances are next to nothing that it's gonna happen." Recalling his final WWE run, RVD said he felt he shouldn't have been there due to a lack of meaningful plans for him, as he was just being used in filler matches as and when needed. WWE management at the time assured Rob that if he chose to return, they'd have proper plans in place, and this conversation has obviously stayed with the WWE Hall of Famer. Over the past year, RVD has been competing for AEW, including on the April 20th Collision, but do you hope to see RVD in WWE again? Let us know in the comments.